Just a few weeks ago in Indianapolis, Indiana, I hosted a job fair. We had over 90 employers representing over 2,500 jobs. 2,700 people showed up. My district is 70% white, 26% African American. Overwhelmingly, African Americans showed up. Many of them, most of them, college graduates, unemployed. A significant amount of them have felonies. And so the indicator there for us, and we've been saying this all along, is that it was consistent with the African American unemployment rate being nearly double that of the national average. We know this. And so for us, I think with President Obama, my dear friend and brother who is in there, I think for many in mainstream America, he gives folks cover to say, now you have a black president, shut up. But we can't shut up. I think we need a greater stimulus effort or recovery effort where we have strategic capital infusions into communities of interest to boost local economies and local markets. We've seen a bit of it with the recovery, and it's done a good job. But we need to see more. We have laws on the books that will incentivize companies and corporations to hire ex-felons, but we don't see them taking advantage of these opportunities. We have talented African-American men and women, but since Obama's presidency, who I'm happy for, and I think we're seeing traction in other areas, we haven't seen the kind of movement that we expected to see in terms of black empowerment, in terms of more African-Americans heading hedge firms and sovereign wealth funds, and being executives in organizations. So I think the question becomes is, what is the issue? Since the Wall Street bailout, black banks overwhelmingly did not benefit. We know that African-American banks are undercapitalized and don't have the same kinds of resources. So I'd like to see a greater effort. I know we have the intelligentsia here, and I think that we need to pair up with groups like National Action Network and other advocacy organizations to identify those opportunities to pair up and build effective relationships with legislators to make sure we put pressure not only on the administration, but on local municipalities to make sure that they're held accountable.
So one of those is jobs. One of those issues, obviously, is jobs in the economy.
I would just like to go to the question, how do we change the discourse? The first thing is, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing this focus on individuals is an overall deterioration in the media in general, where it cannot talk about issues. The only thing it can talk about are things that are sensationalized, and they always have to put a person in front of it, and they go for whatever is most sensational. So I think one of the things we have to do is to demand that media do differently. That means that if we're talking about African Americans, we have to demand that of our media. When you look at the television stations, when you look and listen to the morning radio programs, you hear, even if they get people on who can talk about other things, very frequently it goes to nonsensical topics while you have only 4 to 5 minutes to talk to someone. So we have to start changing the way we listen to media, what our media people put on, so that it does deal with those issues. Sure. So there's a lot, if I look at the President Obama's legislation, the kinds of things that have happened, healthcare reform has made a difference, will make a difference to black people. We don't talk about it that way because we get polarized about it, but we don't actually talk about the issues. Everything now, whether it's talking about white Americans, Hispanic Americans, so much of it deteriorates to the cult of the personality, and that's something that the media has to address, and that's something that we as individuals have to demand less of.
Let me interrupt 1 second. We have one guest who just arrived, the Reverend Al Sharpton, world-renowned civil rights leader, founder and president of the
Charles, can I jump in on this?
Yeah,
because
I
think you raise a very good point that people have to demand that issues be talked about. But I also think, and you touched on this a little bit, that I think now, especially since we have Barack Obama as President of the United States, that we have to recognize that a lot of the things that he's doing, while it might not be branded the quote-unquote black agenda, do affect African Americans overwhelmingly. I mean, you started with jobs. Well, the most immediate thing that the president has to do for everybody in this country, which would impact disproportionately, unfortunately, African Americans, is Job creation, healthcare is another issue. I think that the African American community should give President Obama a bit of a break and start not looking for the magic words black agenda and start looking at what he's doing and how it impacts the African American community and figure out ways how to work with him or help him to get done what he needs to get done and get done what the community needs to get done. And one last point, don't just focus on that end of Pennsylvania Avenue. You gotta focus on the Speaker's office and the Senate Majority Leader's office. I say this to you, I say it to the gay and lesbian community all the time. You can focus all your attention on President Obama, but remember, he's president, he's not king.
That kind of gets to this point of whether or not, it was a lot of debate in the first year, whether or not the president should have, or this administration should have a specific black agenda. That, you know, there are two sides of this debate. One is the one that you just staked out, which is that the policies inevitably benefit disproportionately poor people, minorities, what have you. The other side says it's a stealth agenda that no one can talk about. Because if you start to talk about it and he starts to say, I have a black agenda, then he shoots himself in the foot. And that gets to this issue of whether or not enough is being said, either in the media, as the Pew poll report found, which nobody's talking about it. Which of those is the right path to take? I mean, we can go to Reverend Sharpton.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that it is a disingenuous argument because no president ever had a black agenda. And I think that part of what bothered me when it was raised is if we're going to have an honest discussion, let's say because he's black, he should have a black agenda, not because he's president. Because Bill Clinton didn't have a black agenda. In fact, I think Bill Clinton did some anti-black things, and we called him a black president. So I think we've got to first start from, are we going to change the definition because the president is black? If we are, then we need to say that. If we are not, then we need to say blacks should have a black agenda and have the president respond to that. And just as gay and lesbians, just as women and everyone else. And I agree with him. I think that it is the responsibility of civil rights groups and black groups to push an agenda. But to ask the president to push the agenda to himself is something we never asked any other president. When the head of the Urban League, NAACP, and I met with him on black unemployment, if Barack Obama, as President of the United States, had walked outside and said, I met with them and we're going to have a black agenda, it would have guaranteed the Congress would have voted against whatever legislation he came out of there with. We'd have felt better and got nothing. I think the smart thing to do is to make sure that we have a strategy that will help our people.
So then how do we move forward economically in terms of the job situation? It seems to be, in the short term, a somewhat intractable issue. And a lot flows out of the lack of a person having a job. 75% or something like that of kids are born to single parents. If that mother loses that job, there's no other person in the household to supplement that income. The entire thing falls apart. Black kids are the least likely to get child support and the most likely to get only a portion, if they get any, from the fathers. How do you, in the short term, either policy-wise, civic-wise, community-wise, deal with such a strong toe that the recession is having on the black community? Anyone?
Well, I think there's several answers to that, and part of it is something that we have to acknowledge as an African-American community, and that is the culture and what we accept to be the norm, and therefore not be outraged by it. And that's to a small degree, but the other part of it is making sure that, one, small businesses can still get capital so that they can hire. And when you talk about small businesses, I think that's where, for us in the African-American community, the rubber hits the road. When you talk about our youth dropout rate, well, that number almost decreases if those kids get a summer job. Where are they going to get their summer jobs from? small and disadvantaged businesses if they're allowed to participate. And I'm from New Orleans, which we just had a major disaster in terms of Katrina, Rita, and now BP. But the key to all of recovery should be that the people who suffered should be the ones who reap the rewards of the rebuilding, because that's how you build a sustainable community and actually trickles down. But I think for us, the key is making sure that small businesses, disadvantaged businesses participate. And the one thing we never have when we talk about those goals and things of that nature, someone doing compliance to make sure people have a concerted effort to reach those goals. And I think that's the part where the community can come together and start to really make some hardcore demands. And that's not on the president. A lot of that's on our local communities, on mayors and other things, to make sure that as companies get business, that whatever the goal is for the minority participation and otherwise, that we have a good faith effort to reach it, because that's how our kids will get summer jobs, black men will get hired. And I will tell you that at least in Louisiana, 4 out of 10 kids in Louisiana have a parent that's incarcerated. And if you talk about African-American males, we're releasing 15,000 a year from prison. 7,500 of them go back. But the way that they have a chance not to go back is to get a job. And the only ones that's reaching out, taking a chance, and giving them jobs are small, minority, and disadvantaged businesses. So I think that's one of the things that we as a community should have a really big focus on. And that should be one of those things we use as a litmus test to people's commitment to community.
Let me segue out of that and get Donna and Helena in on this conversation. And I want to talk about black women. News One had a report this month that said that Generation Y, those young black people under 30 years old, it's the first generation where black women will out-earn black men. One of the only races where that will be true. The recession and the job issue is not hitting black women nearly as hard as black men. Black women are overrepresented in colleges. David Leonhardt in the New York Times this week wrote an article where he explained that it was a study that said that blacks have made huge gains in happiness, the feeling of happiness, and it is led by black women. What does this mean for the future of leadership in the black community as more black women step to the forefront, both in earnings potential, both in education, in their own sense of self-worth? How does that change the dynamic of leadership in the black community?
I definitely think it means that over time we'll see more and more women moving into strong leadership positions in the communities, and quite frankly, they've always been in leadership positions in the community. They just may be more visible. But I think, Charles, your point actually raises a larger concern, which is I think we have a crisis going on in our community dealing with the black male. And that as we continue to see the black woman rise into prominence and gain more, it does not necessarily mean that we're winning as a community. If our black men fail or earn less than we do, there's an issue that exists. And I think, to the brother's comment earlier, when we were talking about incarceration rates, when we were talking about what's going on in our community regarding black men, this is a serious conversation that I think we need to have. We just had a panel a couple of weeks ago that Henry Louis Gates chaired, talking about this issue of incarceration rates, and it is absolutely alarming. And I'm not saying that incarceration is the only reason why this is happening, but when you start looking at some of the dynamics, I actually wrote down a couple of things because I wanted to share them with you today. But if you look over the last 30 years, the U.S. penal population has grown between 300,000 and 2 million over the period of 30 years. Most of those people are represented that are in the penal population are African American, as we all know. 3 out of 4 young males in Washington, D.C. will be a part of the penal process at some point in their lives. That's 75%. When you look at the impact that has, it has an impact on once these men are released, it has an impact on their right to vote. Many times in most states in the country, it impacts their right to vote. They're excluded from juries. They're regulated to the margins of our society.
which means that they are legally denied the ability sometimes to obtain employment, housing, and public benefits. So we have a major crisis going on, and we, I think, as a community, are not spending enough time focused on this. And I really believe that, I mean, when you look at the sort of main issues in our community, they are employment, education, and this issue of incarceration.
And I would say definitely piggybacking on what Donna said, we need to change the focus. So often we're talking about black women, and black women are doing this, and black women are moving into the forefront. The cover of Atlantic Monthly, I think, a couple months ago was the end of men. Like, this isn't just an issue within the African American community. Women in general are in the forefront these days. In terms of, I think, the job growth in all the major industries, most of them will be women. I think only 2 of them will move forward when it comes to men. And when we talk about African American women and what are you doing? Why are you so successful? Why haven't you gotten married yet? Why are we focusing on that? Like, what does that matter? And when we talk about the media discourse, let's move past that. And as Donna was saying, let's start focusing on black men. What do we need to do to get you guys up here? What do we need to do to make sure that we're not up here alone? And I think that that's definitely something that we haven't been discussing, as opposed to just discussing black women. Well, I did what I was supposed to do. I did what my mother told me to do. I went to college, I got my master's, and I got a job. And suddenly, that was wrong. And suddenly, I'm being blamed for what's going on in this community, as opposed to us as a community saying, you know what do we do to get everyone there? And it's not just us. Colleges, there's more women, period, in college than there are men. Like, what are we saying to our little girls that we're not telling our little boys?
I feel compelled. I feel compelled to jump in. And I want to come at it again from a different point of view. I have not heard people talking about black women and black women programs so much, except for saying, well, how come you guys are doing a good job? So I'm going to say one of the things that I see that we can do as a solution, something that bothered me when I was a little kid in the 60s, and there was this whole conversation about how can you be for women's rights and feminism and stuff like that when black people have a problem. Well, I remember saying, you know, I don't want to grow up and just be a black woman moved over into what was then white society where women were subjugated and stuff. What I want to bring up is one of the things that we can do is stop bad-mouthing black women and having people not listen to black women and think that it's a bad thing. As Donna said, black women have always been there, have always been holding communities and families together, even if it is because of some other problem, nefarious problem, all kinds of other reasons in society, whether it's incarceration, slavery, what they did with holding down black males' attitudes and stuff. One of the problems we're having is assuming that we can't be proud that black women have been able to hold it together. Once we start saying, okay, here is a resource, this is something that's a good thing in our community, not that black men are down, but that black women have these things about them, then maybe black boys will start doing what their mama told them to do instead of listening to some idiot on, well, anyway. Maybe those are some of the things we need to look at. And I do take it from that point of view because I grew up, I'm in science and engineering and medicine and all these fields that people were telling me at the time women aren't supposed to go into, black women aren't supposed to go into, yet those fields are critical for our future. I bring it up again because we need to maybe stop looking at it as a detriment, as you said, but as a resource and something not to be ashamed of, but to say, hey, black women have it going on, we've been able to do things, now let's be a resource, and how do we change the dynamics and not have black women denigrated constantly in the news and music and things like that.
Reverend Sharpton?
Yeah, I agree with the last 2 speakers, and from the looks of things, I've been a man longer than anybody up here. So I think that the danger of the discussion, I agree with Donna, I think, is that we blame it on the women rather than focus on the men. And we get into this argument that I think is unfair. First of all, I grew up in a single-parent home, so it was easy for me to deal with black women excelling because that's all I had in the house was a black woman. The problem is that many black men grew up without a male figure in the house in the first place. And I think that a lot of that, the incarceration rate has a lot to do with it, but single parent homes, which you referred to, also has a lot to do with it. Because women are raising men and women. And I think that we've got to deal with that whole male problem, from imagery to growing up to searching for male images and finding out role models, and all of that feeds into that. We need to focus on the black male problem. And I think that focusing on the black male problem is not blaming black women, but is really focusing on the problem. Even those of us that feel black men have been targeted, I think that, again, they weren't targeted by black women. So I think that that becomes a real challenge, and I agree with the sisters that have spoken. I think combining that with your last question, I think where government comes in, where at the top the president doesn't have to say this is an agenda for blacks or black men, but I think as we recover in jobs, cabinet members, agency heads can be told we need to deal with the disparity as we roll this out. So I just got a jobs bill. I'm President Obama. I have a jobs bill. I expect every one of my agencies, every one of my cabinet members to have in mind that I want to see the race gap closed. It translates, the devil's in the details. You don't have to announce that. You set policy. So when they have auto industry recover, banking industry recover, they sit across the table from the private sector and say, what are you going to do to equalize the racial disparity as we give you bailout money? That's where you do it in the negotiations, not in the press conference. You do that in the negotiations. And I think that we are smart enough to do that. Everybody doesn't have to do it as a press conference. You do it as a matter of policy in the negotiations. Here are the figures. How do we make these figures become equal? And people do what they have to do in order to do business with government.
Let me take a thread from what you said for our last question, which is this issue, the black male problem. And there's so many issues involved in this. In some ways it's cyclical, from the not having the role model, not having a father figure, but it starts very early, from kids who have to struggle because they don't have enough. Kids go to school without breakfast. Young black men are not progressing in terms of reading as the way that young black women are. Some studies have suggested that is kind of a cultural issue, that they don't read the same way, they don't learn the same way. You have to adjust for that, but instead those young black men get Ritalin and whatever else because they're considered to be problem kids, because they're a little bit more high strung. And you follow that trajectory all the way up to high school, and when kids get in trouble. Donna was speaking earlier about incarceration. Well, a lot of those kids get introduced to the system through low-level drug arrests. What we know about low-level drug arrests is that every national survey about marijuana usage, white kids say they do more marijuana than black kids. And yet in places like New York, 75% of the drug arrests for low-level drug arrests like marijuana are from poor blacks mostly, and then Hispanics. That means that there's a targeting of these kids. And so you come out of that situation where you now have an arrest. Well, Clinton signed the bill when he was in office that basically said if you've ever had an arrest, you could never get financial aid. So you look at this disparity in college attendance among black men and black women. Well, of course that kid can't go to college because he got caught with a joint in his pocket because people were targeting his neighborhood. And that just kind of tracks on and on through life. And how do you then get back? I mean, if that person also cannot get a job, never went to college because he couldn't get the financial aid, how does he then provide for a child? How does he become an eligible bachelor, that a young woman like Helena, who has done all the right things, did what her mother said to, wrote bitches the new black, how does he have a shot? He doesn't have a shot. So how do you break this cycle? Where do we step in? Where do we step in on policy? Where do we step in as a community? Is it an attack all fronts at once? Is there a higher priority than others? Where do we start with this problem?
Well, I would just tell you, in Louisiana, for the past year and a half, we started Louisiana Council on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys to do an audit of where we are right now and how do we go from there. And I will tell you that when you talk about incarceration just for controlled substances, we are disproportionately represented there, and it's for a number of reasons. One, when police officers get other kids that may or may not have a joint or two, a lot of times they will go out of their way to call home and say, you need to come get this kid and you need to deal with it. But with African American kids, you don't get that initial second chance. Another thing that we found as we compiled the report and talked to kids, well, men in Angola, is that our kids hear over and over again, especially black males, we don't expect you to be anything. We didn't, and here's how it goes, excuse my French, but your mama wasn't shit, your daddy wasn't shit, and when you grow up, you ain't gonna be shit. And we've now lowered the expectations for them so that this is all they know. So it feeds right into the program of them not excelling and not reaching those expectations. When I was small, a spanking didn't bother me at all. Don't tell my mother that. The one thing that motivated me was not disappointing my parents and my grandparents because they set such high expectations for me. And that's where you have the breakdown where role models will come into play and other things. But I will tell you that we have to go back and look at and revamp these sentencing laws all over the country, because I will just give you Louisiana, which we are probably the prime example of foolishness. We incarcerate more people than anywhere in the world, but we also have the highest crime rate, which means incarceration is not the answer to reducing crime. It's education, it's recreation, it's all of those things. But the prison industry was a very big business, and it was a method to create an industry, especially in small towns, especially now as we talk about the census and things of that nature. That was an industry for small towns. They would build the prison, they would employ everybody at the prison. At the same time, they were incarcerating so many young black men who truly had substance abuse problems, or they had minor infractions with drugs. But you've now incarcerated them, made them hardened criminal, and made their life that much tougher as they go down the road. And the thing we're dealing with in Louisiana is the same with young black men. I'm gonna get it how I live. That means if you don't give me a meaningful way, a productive way, a legal way to provide for me and my family, I'm gonna do it however I can. And these 15,000 people that are released from prison every year, you've now almost created a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to be back in the system. To fight that, I passed a law so that businesses received a $2,500 tax credit if they hired one. Well, our governor, who everybody probably knows who our governor is, vetoed it. But at the same time, he talks about being tough on crime, which is the easy part for the Republican rhetoric, to say we're tough on crime. Well, the truth is we should be smart about crime, prevent it on the front end, and not spend all of our money fixing it on the back end. And that's the conversation that we should dictate and put our focus in.
You know, another conversation we should have, though, and maybe this is implicit and everyone understands sort of the subtext and I'm not hearing it, but it's one thing to focus on role models and black boys being told by them that they won't amount to anything. At what point do we turn the mirror on ourselves and on parents? Where are the parents in all this? You know, my mother was on me pretty much from birth. From as long as I can remember, she said to me, probably before I went to school on the first day of kindergarten, she said, okay, when you turn 18, you are going to do one of two things. Either you're going to college or you're moving out, because I'm not taking care of a grown-up. You will be a grown-up, you can take care of yourself if you're not going to college. At what point do we turn to our friends or relatives or neighbors who aren't doing for their children what they should be doing, what you're doing for your own, and say, look, you're hurting your child, you're hurting your family, you're hurting us, you're hurting this community. Now, last night I went to see the movie Waiting for Superman about the education system in the United States, and if you have not seen it, you must see it. It's a terrific movie, and the parents in this movie are very sympathetic. They want to do the right things by their children, but there's this one mom who sat there and said, well, her dad ran out on them, and school wasn't important to her parents, so wasn't important to her. Then she had children, and her grandson's father, which was her son, school didn't mean anything to him either. And I'm listening thinking, well, did you do anything to help it? But no, because it's not part of her tradition. Fortunately for her grandson, you know, she's realized I made mistakes with my children, and I'm going to do everything I can to give him what I couldn't give my own children. School wasn't important to her. To a certain extent, it still isn't important to her, but it's important that her grandson get the education. And so until we start focusing on us in our own backyard, and not only incarceration rates and targeting and things like that, but what are we doing to stop feeding that pipeline? That's my ultimate point.
Well, but can I say something to that? I think, and I'll be real quick, I think that following up what Jonathan said and what he said is very important, because we've also gotten it so bad now to where if young people are trying to educate themselves and are eloquent, they're accused of acting white. It is almost like we have made blacks synonymous with thuggery and gangsterism and criminality, and we've got to challenge that. Because the whole pop culture world, the video recording world, has made blackness, this is the first generation that blackness is about dumbing down rather than excelling. And I think that we've got to challenge that. And I think the new racism is low expectations, even internally. Internally in our own families, I agree. I never knew I was underprivileged till I got to college, because my mother didn't raise me like that. I mean, when I got to sociology class, they said, we're going to study underprivileged, people out of the project, single parent homes on welfare. I said, oh, they talk about me. Because we were not raised that way. We were expected to be something. And I think that the expectation we can't blame on the outside. Yes, we've got to deal with the laws. Yes, you're right about what Clinton, the first black president, did to us with the putting us where we couldn't get financial aid. But I think that we've got to deal with our expectations in our families and our role models. James Brown adopted me as a teenager. I was close with his son got killed, so he raised me. And as you can see with my hair, I never recovered. But you tend to be like who you grow up under. And that's a natural thing. But if you're growing up under hoodlums and gangsters as the role models, that's what you're going to feel you should be.
But which of these is, one second, but which of these is the horse and which is the cart? I mean, as a kid, I didn't know any single parents when I was growing up. You know, every house had a mother, a father. They both worked. If you don't have enough men who are not I mean, this acceleration into the prison system was not in the 70s. It's not the 60s. This is a very, very recent phenomenon. So all of a sudden you have people, and I have people pointing a sign at me saying, shut up, hurry up. All right. So all of a sudden you have a lot of men who are now not necessarily able, for whatever reasons, they didn't do the right things or the system didn't treat them right. But which is the horse and which is the cart? Which, you know, do we start with the personal responsibility issue, or do we deal with the policy implications that the representative was talking about, which are just funneling these men into the system?
You have to do this simultaneously. Right. This is not anything, well, I'm going to do this for 10 years and I'm going to do something else for 10 years. Because during that 5 to 10 years, you're not doing one thing, those people are lost. But I wanted to bring up the whole issue of role model. It's a perfectly wonderful psychological term that's been so bastardized that we don't know what it means. The reason why role models are not always positive is because role models are those individuals you are around, as the Reverend said, those are the people that you grew up around. Their behavior are the ones you model. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in Woodlawn, the Blackstone Rangers, the Disciples, and all of those were there. My brother did not join a gang. Why not? Because my dad would have had his butt if he had joined a gang, when all the way around him there were other people doing things. But we want to go back to their responsibilities society has as well. Those societal images. Right now we talk about college all the time, and I know, you know, Y'all get ready, y'all gonna be upset, I don't wanna be on YouTube with this. But people talk about college all the time, and college is really wonderful, but at the same time that we talk about college, we in some kind of ways denigrate jobs that do not require 4-year degrees. We have to stop doing that. We have to pay attention. So we say, oh, he's a garbage man, that's a bad thing. Well, he has a job, it's not necessarily a bad thing. My father was a maintenance supervisor for United Charities of Chicago. My mother was a school teacher, but becoming an astronaut, becoming a physician, all of those things was as a direct result of their work ethic. They were my role models. And so, role models are your teachers, everyone around you. So we need to pay attention to that. We also have to understand that when we sit our kids in front of television sets and those kind of things, then the images of who they see become role models. And when all of those images of black people range from the thuggery to the skanky stuff to whatever you want to talk about, then that becomes an issue. And there's just too much of that we are generating. Mm-hmm. So if we look at this, let's talk about those things we can impact now. We have to get our own houses in order. As adults, we have to behave.
I have to excuse Reverend Sharpton. He's treating us like, the people that reverends don't like come to church late and leave early.
I will get you for that.
Same thing about President Obama. He's cold. He's an elitist. He's intelligentsia. He's not common enough. What does that matter? But we talk about it in the black community. We talk about it in the black community often. It's, can we relate to him? Can he sit down and have a beer with us, quote unquote? And because some people don't see him that way, suddenly we're not as interested because he's not as charismatic as we thought he was, quote unquote, now. And that's an issue. That's a real issue in the black community, I think.
Right, but when we're not focused on the issues, it's very easy to talk about personality and rumors and stuff like that. It's the fact that we're not organized and we're not focused that we can fall, that the community sort of falls for these other sort of tactics.
But hey,
I guess.
All right, we have questions. Starting here in the middle.
Can you hear me?
I think we can.
My name is Anthony Perry. I'd like to say hello to the panel, especially to Mr. Carson, since as though we're from the same hometown, Naptown. I wrote a book called The 2-Minute Drill, The 10 Basic Steps to Sales. And the young lady here in the middle, I have to agree with you that everything can't be based on college. You're looking at a man who's been employed for 30 years and never been unemployed and never been without a job. The new frontier in America is called sales. Right now, I did a Google on sales jobs in just the Washington, D.C. area, and there's 1,000 jobs right now in Washington, D.C. But the difference is all these black males here in the room and around the country have a gift for gab. They just haven't been able to learn how to take that street gab and turn it into corporate gab. You don't need a degree to make a living. You just need to have the skills of sales. It could change the frontier of black America right away.
All right. Question, though?
The question is, how come we as individuals and as a panel are not looking at sales and always looking at college?
Okay. Anybody want to take that?
You want to go ahead?
Go right ahead.
In terms of sales, that's one set of jobs. There are lots of jobs out there that do not require 4-year degrees.
Right.
I was going to just say when we look across the spectrum, and this is just informational purposes, I'm going to talk about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's going to be an announcement today, later in the White House, about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Why do I talk about that? Not because everybody needs to be a nuclear physicist or something like that, but do you know that the highest paying industries are high-tech industries, but the majority of jobs in high-tech industries do not require 4-year degrees. Exactly. They do require you to come out of high school being able to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and do a little bit of algebra, a little bit of percentages, that kind of stuff, and know what pH is. And by the way, we want our hairdressers to know what pH is as well, to acid-base balance. But I'm serious, but when I bring that up is we need to pay attention to that because there are incredible jobs that are out there. The woman who was my suit tech for my space flight was the first person to graduate in her family from high school. as she dressed SR-71 pilots, and she was, you know, my life depended on her. You go around, just everywhere you look, there are these jobs, and we need to be paying attention to it, which means that we need to be paying attention to public schools, to education, and what our kids actually come out with in high school, not just that they graduate and then they can go to college and a junior college so they can say they went to college. What can you actually do? Can you be an electrician? Can you be a plumber? So sales is one piece, but let's not forget the things where you have to manufacture, because the salespeople have to have something to sell.
But my point is, right now, there's a lot of black males in America who don't have jobs, and sales jobs are available. You know, you can take the average black man who has a gift for gab, and he can make $100 grand a year. He can feed his family. He can live a life. He can drive a nice car. He can bag and sag and walk around hip-hoppy on the weekend, but during the week, he's a citizen. Now, I know it can happen because I am an example of that, coming right out of the backyard of his neighborhood to a middle-class citizen. So the brothers that are out here right now need jobs. There are jobs, and right now we could put them in work in the next 30 days. I'm not talking 6 months, 8 months down the road. I'm talking about right now.
Thank you. We're going to get to the next. We have a long line there. We'll get as many questions as we can. Thank you.
I think the brother makes a great point, though. If you look statistically, I mean, certainly college is important. I want my daughter to go, but he makes a serious point. Only 22%, less than 22% of Americans even have a college degree that's doctorate on down. And when I talk to people, people say all the time, you know, Congressman Carson, I want to run for public office. I say, why? I say, well, I'm smarter than this guy. I'm smarter than that person. But if you don't love people, you can't lead them properly. And so this young man right here, who talks about black men having the gift of gab, I think most of us were born with that. It's just how we use it properly. I meet young brothers like that all the time. I go to high schools, and I see these same young black men who have been mislabeled as special ed, but when I look at their notepad and look at their lyrics or their hip-hop material, I see prolific writers. I see the ingenious use of metaphor and simile. They have to work on some verb conjugation, but that's okay. It's all right. But I see genius there that has to be cultivated. And these same young men can go to a studio, get a CD pressed up for $1.50, $2, sell it for $10. They made a profit margin, sell 100,000 CDs in a region and make $1 million. That's genius, but we just have to pool our resources, have an investment. I was raised by the village, so I can appreciate the village concept. Brother Jonathan makes an important point about parents. My wife's an educator, but when I go into these schools, oftentimes, you know, I see where English as second language students are outperforming young black men and women. And parents, many of them are functionally illiterate, so it's difficult for us to expect them to help their kids when they've had very negative experiences with school themselves, to your earlier point. So I think ultimately it's going to take the village concept to raise our kids. I got to go vote. Thank you, guys. Love you.
Wait, before we get to this question, I mean, just a procedural note. I have a job to do here, so if I might have to be a little rude, cut you off a little bit. When you get to the mic, please just state your question as briefly as you can. Panelists, if you can answer them and as quickly as we can, I'd like to get as many of these people's questions in as possible. They've stayed here this whole time. They have something they want to say. I want to get as many as possible. So I'm going to be a little brutal with the timing. All right?
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I am an adjunct professor at Towson University. I teach future teachers how to teach our children. Also the director of the Assessment and School of Pharmacy at Howard University. What I would like to say is what I have not heard, and that is that what emphasis are we going to put on relationship?
The relationship?
On relationships, because we're talking about the achievement of black women and black men, which I have 3 sons, a husband and 4 brothers and a father. And I know how to bring the best out of black men. But the thing that I want to, for the panel to address is relationship. My mother and father stayed together for 60 years. I've been married for 32 years. When are we going to start talking about relationship and how our black women need to treat our black men and how black men need to be trained to treat our women like queens and kings? We're talking a lot of surface stuff, but the bottom line is that I was the first in my family to graduate from college. Under me came 30 other my brother, my sisters, and all my nieces and nephews,
Okay.
including my sons. My question is, it starts with us in relationship and us showing our children that we can love one another, respect one another, and stop talking out of both sides of our mouths as it relates to what we want our children to do. And we can't do it because we're jumping from men to men, from women to women, and we're not really showing what we need to show and actually providing what we need to provide for our children, which is a proper example and our way of life.
Okay. Who's going to take that one? Because I'm divorced and you don't want to know what I have to say.
You know what? The questioner raises a good point about relationships, and we need to talk about relationships, but ultimately I think we need to talk about values. What values do we instill in our children? How do we exhibit them? How do we show the values that we expect them to live by? You know, one of the things that concerned me about what the congressman just said was he was focused on the fact that, you know, he goes into these schools and he sees the lyrics and that they're prolific writers and they could go to the store and get a CD and sell for $10 and make a profit and sell 100,000 and make $1 million. Well, the value there is the only way to be of any use, any value to you or your family is to make a lot of money. Instead of the most important thing you can be to you and your family and your community is to be someone who is productive in whatever way that's defined, whether you make $100,000, $1 million, or $50,000 and helping your family afford get along, or you're helping your niece or nephew or your grandchild go from kindergarten to college. It's not about being rich, it's about living a good life however you define it and however it impacts positively your community.
Being productive and present.
And present,
yes. It's like a lot of people are kind of, particularly black men, are like phantoms. Like you see them, but, but they're not playing with the kid, it's not being with the loved one, it's not being with the wife or whatever. It's just a phantom in the neighborhood who's not necessarily adding the productivity you're talking about.
I was just going to say one of the most important parts of a relationship, and you can't have those positive relationships you're talking about until you really care about yourself honestly and truly. Not just, I love myself because I dress well or something like that, but do you care about yourself? Do you care enough to take care of yourself, to educate yourself, to go out and not stay in abusive relationships, to find positive relationships and find positive relationships not just with someone who's whether it's, you know, male, female, sexual partner, whatever, but even with other friends. And I think that all of those relationships really hinge around you having a positive relationship with yourself, which I think quite a few of us don't, for many of the reasons we
don't have time for follow-ups. We're going to have to go to the next person. Thank you for the question.
Good morning. Thank you to all the panelists. I'll try to make this quick. One of the panelists had mentioned that one of the issues is that we don't have organization, and my question, especially as we approach this election, is this. You know, a lot of the heroes that we have, that we talk about, Charles Hamilton Houston being one of mine as well, they were all under, there was one thing that made everyone common at one point, as far as African Americans, we were all subjected to the same laws in this country. Therefore, whether you had a doctor or an attorney, or you had somebody who worked as a garbage collector, everybody was treated unequally. Therefore, it was in a lot of ways arguably easier to organize because there was a commonality in the way we were treated in America. Now, everybody gets theirs the way that they know how, whether it's education, whether it's music, what have you. Do you think, or can somebody comment on whether, as a community, we rely so much on having to have one leader or having to have somebody to look to, and when are we going to get to independent thought, individual thought, as opposed to always feeling that we have to organize, always feeling that we have to have a common issue, as opposed to just opening up a newspaper and reading something random about the stock exchange and getting upset about that and doing something about that? Why does it have to be something that we all share? Why can't we just, you know, why can't we just advocate on a daily basis?
I think that's definitely something that we as millennials, I guess, people born like 1980 and after, or what we're calling, I'm sorry.
What we?
I think that is definitely, you know, you've seen a lot of stories and talk about the difference between the quote unquote civil rights generation versus the Cosby generations, which has been called before, and how we view organizing and being civic-minded differently. Because just like you were saying, like I consider myself a feminist. I'm just as interested in women's rights and reproductive rights, and my mother is a lesbian, and LGBT rights, as I am in the quote-unquote black agenda. And I think that we don't talk often about, we mention the black agenda often, but what is it? I'm not sure what the talking points are. But we talk about it often, and we have no idea what it actually means, because it can mean something very different to me as a single 30-year-old African-American college graduate than it means to my grandmother. And we don't, there's definitely a gap there that we never discuss, and I think it causes contention sometimes in some organizations, right? Because you got all the young people saying, we need to do this, and everyone else is like, well, this is how we did it before. And then we're not having a conversation. There's a lot of talking at each other as opposed to true conversations and really moving forward and just impact the people who threw this people who threw the panel today. Sorry, CBC. You know, this young people getting together and having a real discussion and bringing everyone into the discussion across generations, across socioeconomic lines, and we really start to have to have those conversations. You can't think what you believe is different or better for the quote-unquote black agenda than what someone else believes.
I also think it's important for us, to collectively look at our community and figure out ways to help everyone move forward. I think one of the sort of tragedies that we've seen over the last 30 years is as we've had more and more African Americans become affluent and educated, that there has been very little reaching back and bringing up those people that are behind. And I think that we have a responsibility for those of us who have, everyone in this room who has achieved some level of education, to actually look back and figure out how can we continue to help those brothers and sisters that still have not gotten to the same point. I do believe it's important for us to have a collective approach to doing that. We just haven't, I think to everyone's point here, no one's quite figured out exactly what is the agenda that we're all kind of focused on.
All right, next question.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Keisha Rogers, and I am the Democratic nominee for the 22nd Congressional District of Texas, which many people may know is the Johnson Space Center area. My question, I'm going to keep it to the economics of it. First of all, we have $27 trillion in bailouts to Wall Street. We have a situation where 8 million people since 2008 have been foreclosed on. The reality is, while all of this is going on, municipalities are burning down right now. Think about Detroit. Why is it that we are not challenging this president? He's playing golf while the American people are being left to suffer. My campaign, I won calling for Obama's impeachment because we need a real economic recovery plan.
That's fine, but just, I need a question. I need a question. Okay. Somebody cut your mic.
Well, let me just say this. I don't want anyone in here to get confused. I'm the Democratic nominee in the 2nd Congressional District of Louisiana, and that is not a part of my agenda. I just want to make that crystal clear.
Whoa. Not on my watch. You got it. If the mic is not working, no ma'am. Can we move to the next question? Okay, fine, we got it. Economic crisis, we're going to get to that question. That's fine.
Let me start.
We need a question. For all of our people in the line, I need a question. There are people behind you. We need to move faster. Her question was, let her ask the question.
Okay. My question, thank you. My question again is, what are we going to do about the economic crisis? We need a Franklin Roosevelt solution. Democrats are not going to win in November unless we get serious here. Unless we actually address the question that unless we end these bailouts, kick the Wall Street faction out of the Democratic Party, that means Pelosi, that means Barney Frank, that does mean Obama. Let's address how we're going to help You talking about a black agenda? Obama doesn't even have an American agenda. No black agenda, no agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the question in there is, what are we going to do about the economic crisis? Does anyone on our panel want to take that question?
Yeah. I feel compelled, since I actually live in that district, I have a house there. I have a house there, but anyway. And I used to be at Johnson Space Center. But what I want to say is, first of all, I think that we're misunderstanding things. If we don't recognize that it's going to take more than 2 years to actively get rid of the things that have been happening. And I just had to say that because, again, I drive by the post office and there are those signs and those people trying to engage me in that conversation. But when we talk about the economic agenda, I think some of the big issues we have to pay attention to is that there's one big thing hanging out there that we could do, which is deal with what we're spending on wars. If we look at the amount of money that we've spent on wars and we look at what's happening, that would make a really big difference in where we're going. We have to look at infrastructure does make a difference. Infrastructure is something that we need to move goods and services. But I want to stop when we talk about what's going on within municipalities. Cutting out education is not the answer. We cannot say that, again, we're going to we're going to cut out teachers, because kids don't have that time. And if we're looking into the future in terms of what we're going to be doing from this year to 10 years from now, if we are not educating the 5 to 10-year-olds right now in their ABCs, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and doing a good job of it, then we can't look forward. You can't go back and buy those years. So some of the answers that we have is to continue to invest very strongly in education. Do not blame school teachers for failures of other things and then say we're going to blame them and get rid of them en masse. Let's look at what we're doing in military spending, and let's do something that has to do with infrastructure, because those things are critical, and we cannot regain that lost time.
And Charles, real fast, I would just ask that the questioner focus a lot of her ire not on the White House, because she mentioned a lot of things, the bailouts, but also Detroit's burning down. Well, that's not the president's fault, that's Detroit's fault. So her anger should be directed at a more local level, at Austin, at the folks who are running her district. If she wants something done about her district or her community, she needs to focus more locally. Because if she thinks she's coming to Congress and suddenly she's going to wave a pen and end bailouts and things like that, she's in for a world of hurt.
Her district.
2 things. 1 second before you get to that.
Oh, really?
I'm going to get close to this mic so I can get back to the questioning and how we're going to deal with the questioning. If you have a question, please form your question quickly so that everyone behind you will have a chance to speak. We only have 30 minutes left. Second thing, if you are running for office or own some sort of business, please do your campaigning in the hallway and save this for the questioner of the panel. Thank you. Now, I just got handed a question that I'm going to have to preempt the line with, because it's on one of these really bright pieces of paper and I have to do whatever they say. The question is for the panel, and it is, why has the Tea Party been able to organize so well in the last 2 years, and is there anything that the African American community can learn from their mobilization? I have my own opinions about this, but I'm going to let you guys have it.
Well, I would say that we as a community have organized like that when we have one cause, when we have a cause that we're rallying behind. And I think if you look at the Tea Party and what they're doing, they have a cause. And their cause is the President of the United States. And no matter what issue he's on, they're opposite it. So it's easy for them to, I think, create a message and organize based upon a common enemy. And in the African American community, when we had a common cause, which we've talked about as if it was integration, if it was equal rights, and all of those things, we are able to organize. The difference right now that we see is the diversity within the African American community. Some people are talking about LGBTQ rights, some people are talking about women's rights, some people are talking about different things. So we don't have a one common cause. The one common cause is to make the world a better place, but That's just not the one that everyone's focused on. And I think that their cause is so specific that they're able to rally around it because it's a cause, and that cause is, in my opinion, the President of the United States.
You know what, I would say, though, that we have to remember that there's the Tea Party, which the T is taxed enough already. These are people who are concerned about taxes, about the deficit, about the bailouts, about all these things that were done basically to save the American economy. They don't say what they would do, what they would have done otherwise, but fine, that's their thing. Then you have the extreme element within the party that is piggybacking on this very real concern. They're piggybacking on it, and these are the birthers, the 14th Amendment people, the 10%, all these crazy folks. Now, it's not, again, to be clear, I'm talking about the far extreme of the Tea Party. But as we saw in Delaware, the Tea Party is having a very active fight, not with President Obama, but with moderate Republicans. So it's kind of fun to watch, but it's also a little scary because if Christine O'Donnell and Sharon Engel and there are one or two other folks I can't remember right now who are Rand Paul. If they get into the Senate, it's going to be fun to watch Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell try to herd those cats. So while you might think that the Tea Party is focused on President Obama, no, right now they're focused on weak-willed, as they would see it, Republicans who would have the temerity and the nerve to work with the Democratic administration, to work with the Democratic president, to help pass policies that, are at least trying to help the American people and save the American economy.
Right, but back to the question, which is there anything to be learned? Is there a way to model something on the model?
I would say let's wait until November. Let's wait until the midterm elections, because if all these people who have been endorsed by the Tea Party, if they all go down in flames, well, the lesson learned is you can't be extreme. But if there is one thing, and you pointed on it, it's having a single issue. A single issue and a single focus. The single issue is spending, taxes, deficits. And all the other folks are just piggybacking. They're surfing along.
Okay. Question?
Hello, my name is Deion Jones. I just started my freshman year at American University, and I'm the president of American University's Youth Empowerment Program. The question I have is, years and years, Tavis Smiley, all of us, we've had conversation after conversation, after discussion, people getting paid to do research after research after research, but there's never been action. When are we actually going to start taking the action to address the social problems that affect the African American youth in high school, middle school, elementary school, and then when are we going to invite one of those students to join you all on the stage to have the discussion with you?
Good question. Who wants to take that one?
I've talked enough.
I think you're exactly right. I think it's what we've been talking about this entire time. You've heard, I think almost all the panelists in their own way, shape, or form have said that there is a lack of an African American agenda. We're not exactly sure what it is. There are some key issues in the African American community, again, education, jobs, incarceration, as we've talked before. But I think you are right. We need to figure out how we're going to mobilize around a key issue. I think the learnings that Charles just mentioned a few moments ago, do we have any learnings from the Tea Party? Everyone commented, there is one single vision, and we just haven't had that as a community. As we've gone on and sort of gotten ours, some of us have gone on and been extremely successful. We just have not taken the time to sit down and figure out what is next on the agenda, what are we going to mobilize around, and how are we going to take the strategic steps in order to get there.
I think it also comes to what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about values. I remember when I got into college, there was one goal for every single freshman, and that was to graduate and make money. Nobody talked about becoming a school teacher. Nobody talked about being a politician. No one talked about having a professional career, being civically engaged. It was all about, I want to be on Wall Street, I want to make money. Number one, because you got to pay back loans. which is a huge deal that we rarely talk about. We send our kids to college and then say, okay, go out and, now the world is your oyster and there's no jobs and you're $60,000 in debt. And because of that, I think a lot of people don't get involved professionally, have these professional careers where that's what you're doing on a daily basis, is interfacing with children and raising the next generation. 40 years ago, to be a school teacher was like the height of excellence. And you were a professional, it was awesome, and you were celebrated, right? I remember when I graduated Columbia, and somebody wanted to be a teacher, you're like, really? That's what you're gonna do? Because the values are different. And as we move away from being so focused on material things and so focused on just getting that great job where you can wear your sexy suit and have your Louboutins and, do all that kind of thing, when we move away from that, then you'll start to see that change. When I wanted to go to graduate journalism school, and I talked to my family about it, and they were like, really? So what are you going to do with that degree? How are you going to make money doing that? That was always the question. It's like, we didn't send you to Columbia to think all day and write. And that was, it was a revolution for me to say, I want to be a writer, because that wasn't valued. That wasn't something that my family thought I should be doing. And then, when I made money out of it, now they're like, okay, that was great.
They're really supportive now.
But you
you make money at it?
You do have to talk about values, especially when it comes to careers. And I think that's one of the things we don't talk about in our community.
And I want to say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
One other thing, again, I understand your frustration, the discussions and conversations and research and all of that, but here's one thing that I wish we as a community could move from. We talked a lot about the Black agenda, when what we really should be talking about is an American agenda. All the things we're talking about, the entire country is worried about. Jobs, education, healthcare. I think until we start talking about, quote unquote, our issues as not being separate and apart from what's going on, but is a critical part of what's going on, then the action that you want, the action that everybody in this room wants, won't move nearly as quickly as it should. Case in point, for instance, the HIV/AIDS crisis. It's an American tragedy. The folks who are disproportionately affected by it are us. Black men, black women, gay or straight. But as long as we keep talking about this as a problem in the black community, as opposed to an American problem that the American people must solve, then it's easy for people to look and say, well, it's just them. We have an incarceration problem, we have a jobs problem, we have an economic problem, we have a health problem. Where's our agenda? As opposed to saying, hey, we're American citizens, what are we going to do to solve these problems?
I wanted to say, we keep talking about what is agenda. Let me give us agenda, okay? I think if we want to find one thing, you write it down, and it's real easy, is education. Good public education for everyone in this country, which will pick up African Americans, others. But good public education is not just lip service, because we've been paying an awful lot of lip service for a long time. And let me tell you why I know that we're not committed. Because we think it's okay to say we will fund education with a lottery. That's how I know we're not committed, because we would not dare say that about the military, about Social Security, about Medicare, or any of those things. So I know we're not serious. But if we talk about good education, what does that mean? That means that classroom sizes are small. That means we put the money into the schools to make sure that the buildings are fresh and clean. You don't have to put a computer in every classroom in first and second and third grade, but you do need to have a bench where they can grow the potato plants and those kind of things, that they can learn their colors. You shouldn't have any more than 20 kids with, can you imagine taking care of 26-year-olds and then expect them to go home not only not bleeding, but they learn their colors? I would be happy if they went home okay. But we have to really talk about good education.